Hi there, I'm Sarah Zarella, a portrait and wedding photographer and your host for Wedding Secrets Unveiled. This is a podcast where we cut through the complexity of wedding planning, leaving you with everything you need to know direct from the industry experts. If you want to simplify your wedding planning, while having fun, of course, you came to the right place. Join me while I guide you through your planning, starting from your engagement to your big day where you say, I do. After photographing for the past 18 years, I am sharing with you tips and tricks to cut through the excess noise because I believe from the moment you said yes, your planning experience should be a magical time in your life. Here you'll find episodes that are fun, stress-free, and straight to the point, with a fresh, honest take about the reality of what you really need to know about planning your perfect day. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. So today I have Father Patrick on, and he will be talking about Catholic ceremonies. We will get into a little bit if a Catholic ceremony is right for you, what you need to do to prepare for a Catholic ceremony, and also we go over how to customize a Catholic ceremony, which is a very unique approach. Regardless if you are Catholic or religious, this is a very informative episode for you. Whether you are a couple planning a wedding or going to be a guest at a Catholic ceremony, this is going to be an interesting episode as you will fully start to understand the sacrament of marriage in the eyes of the Catholic Church, and also you will have a new form of appreciation of what you are either participating in or witnessing. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my very informative episode and conversation with Father Patrick.
Sarah, thanks so much for having me on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I am so happy that you accept our invitation because we have had so many listeners ask us about this exact subject that we're going to talk about, and I knew you were the person to be on. So thank you.
We've had fun working weddings together in the past, so it's great to be together. And I will say, just as a disclaimer, look, I'm not the Pope, so my word on any of this is not the last word, but I will try to be as informative and accurate as I can.
Love it. Well, with that said, can you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, who you serve, and what you do in your business?
Fantastic. So my name is Father Patrick Briscoe, as you said, and I'm the editor of a national Catholic newspaper called Our Sunday Visitor. We've got a website. We produce a ton of daily content and a daily newsletter. But I stepped to that ministry after a few years of ministering in Rhode Island. So that's where Sarah, you and I met at St. Pius V Parish Church. So my background before I got more involved in Catholic media was parish ministry. And as a parish priest, as a Catholic priest active in Rhode Island, I did a lot of weddings, and they were a great joy. It was a lot of fun. I met a lot of wonderful couples. And I will say this, that every wedding was unique. So I think one of the big myths about a Catholic wedding that people have right from the top is that everything is formulaic and that there are no options and that every Catholic wedding is the same. And that's not really true because the personalities of the couples will shine through every ceremony. So there are some structures, there are some expectations that the church has for important reasons, and we'll share some of those. But as a priest, it has just been so beautiful to get to meet all of these different couples, people in all different walks of life who are celebrating their weddings in the Catholic Church.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what brought you into the media side of things versus the ceremony side?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So for me, I've greatly enjoyed my time as a parish priest because I'm a people person. And that's one of the things that I sit down and I do right when I'm meeting with a couple. I still have 3 or 4 weddings that I'm doing this summer, even though I'm not in parish ministry. So for me, it's those relationships and the people that I've met along the way that have always been really important. I stepped into Catholic media, though, because one thing that weighed heavily on my heart was, again, all of the misconceptions about the church that surround it today. There are some aspects of Catholic teaching that are difficult. Some of those, come up in wedding planning, and some of those are tough for some Catholics and non-Catholics to hear and to handle. And so I wanted to be part of the solution to that, right? To allow the Catholic position to be clearly explained, so that people could understand where the church was coming from, what our understanding of the gospel is as we approach some of these questions. So that's kind of how I landed in the Catholic media space, again, after my work at St. Pius V Parish, after teaching at Providence College, after serving actually as a chaplain at Providence College for a year. So a lot of work with young people, young couples, and that really informed this desire of mine to help clarify Catholic teaching and present just a dynamic and engaging and compelling picture of Catholic life.
So you definitely are the right person to have on the show today. For sure.
Well, let's hope.
So let's get right into it. I mean, as a wedding photographer myself, and you also perform so many different ceremonies, you kind of touched upon it already, that there is a lot of people who feel that everything is so cookie cutter, right? So let's just kind of dive into it. So if you're getting engaged or you are engaged, how does somebody know or even start to wonder or figure out if a Catholic ceremony is right for them?
Well, you roll the dice and then you check the clouds and you see if the pigeon feather falls on a blade of grass on the third month where there's a full moon. No, I mean, this sounds, some people feel like it's divination, but we can give some clear prospects, right? So the first question someone should be asking, if you're listening to this episode, you're probably a Catholic, or maybe your partner, your future spouse, is a Catholic. So from the church's perspective, first of all, we want to say that marriage is a sacrament, which means that weddings are important for the church. It's an obligation and a duty for the church's ministers to officiate at weddings. So even though, and some couples have had this experience, even though the priest will act like it's a burden, it's his job to support you. This is what it means to be in ministry, to help prepare couples for sacrament, which they have a right to as Catholics. So that's the first principle that I want to say, that from the church's perspective, that weddings are key and integral to life, because they're the way that a couple is going to get the grace that they need for their relationship to continue to grow. So the wedding ceremony is essential. It's part of the priest's job. A couple shouldn't feel like a burden approaching a parish priest to begin to discuss their ceremony. So to get really to the meat of your question, though, where does a couple start? I think the best way is to talk to someone. And I know that can right out of the gate be an obstacle, because a rectory office is going to be open from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays. So the communication thing can be very difficult. And just as friends here on the podcast, I'll admit to you, I have not done the best job communicating with couples over the years, because as a priest, a lot of times there's not a lot of support, and you're typically a one-man show with a parish secretary who may or may not know how to use email, and the email account is something like rectorycats487@aol.com, and the couple right out of the gate can be panicked. So my first appeal is to contact the priest, and then know that when you do ask to speak to the priest or the deacon, who can help you answer this question of whether a Catholic ceremony is right for you, know that there's gonna be a little bit of a feedback loop, and it's not personal, it's not out of animus, it's just the way that parish communications are in 2023.
I think that is such a wonderful little tip to just kind of think about, because like you said, I mean, ultimately, just because there might be a barrier in communication does not mean it's anything personal, or does not mean that the end product won't be successful. It's just like you said, sometimes it is what it is. We're in this weird technical world where everybody expects something quickly, but we have to understand the media that we're dealing with. Like you said, a lot of times people are volunteers, right? And they're not in a quote unquote office all day, every day.
So it can be frustrating, and I think couples should have that in mind right out of the gate. There are many websites that will help, lay out the basic questions. I mean, if you are a Catholic and you're marrying a Catholic and you're both getting married for the first time, you will have the easiest time possible. That is the easiest of all worlds, having a Catholic ceremony. If you are a Catholic marrying a non-Catholic, It is very easy also to get married in the Catholic Church. And sometimes this can be an obstacle for people too, because it wasn't that way. So our parents and our grandparents weren't necessarily raised in a Catholic church where that was even permitted. So there will be stories in your families about Aunt Kate who got married to so-and-so in the rectory parlor because he was Jewish. Okay, that's not the case today. A Catholic can get married in the Catholic Church to whomever they're marrying in a Catholic ceremony. So I think that's another historical obstacle that is there. If you are a Catholic and you are marrying someone and it's your second marriage, the church will require an investigation. And so sometimes people have heard about this. If you've been divorced, you'll have in your mind that it's not possible to get remarried in the Catholic Church. Well, my word to you is maybe. It's more complicated than just that, because in the eyes of the church, your first wedding might not have been a valid wedding. So, for example, if you were young and you got married in Las Vegas and there wasn't a minister of the church there, in the eyes of the Catholic Church, that wasn't a church wedding. If you are now grown up and you're having your second ceremony and you decide that you want to have a Catholic ceremony, at that point, in the eyes of the church, that's your first ceremony. So it would be possible in that case, for example, to have a Catholic wedding. So there are extenuating circumstances like that. And again, this is why it's really key to talk to someone before trying to adjudicate your own situation, to get in touch with a priest or a deacon who can lead you through some of those conversations. And then the last word of encouragement on that point, especially if you're someone who's been divorced and who is planning a second wedding, again, the annulment process can seem at first very complicated. I have known many people who found in the annulment process extraordinary healing, liberation, and closure. So again, I think the reputation of this process is that, it's church bureaucracy limiting the freedoms of my life, when my experience with the annulment process is actually people have gotten their lives back because of the process. So that's what I would say out of the gate.
That's very interesting what you just said, that there's a little bit of healing that comes with, like you said, the process of going through an annulment. I would assume it's also on the other end too. Let's just out of curiosity, if you do decide that getting married in the church or having the Catholic ceremonies for you, is there anything that couples have to do to prepare for this?
Absolutely, yes. So again, these are not viewed by the church as obstacles to having a church wedding. They're not checkpoints. They're all in the service of the couple, helping the couple to move into the next phase of life. So a lot of churches will have about a 6-month to a 1-year period of preparation. You might have seen some news, if you follow Catholic news, that process has been changed globally by the Vatican. It has, but again, how it's implemented in every place is different. So you'll have to find out what is followed in the diocese where you want to get married. So again, that process typically is about 6 months to a year. It will involve several meetings with a priest, perhaps a weekend retreat. One tool available is called the Focus Inventory, and it's fabulous. It's a psychological tool to help couples recognize what they have and haven't discussed. And then there's another kind of technical process called the premarital inventory, which is administered by a priest. And basically it's on behalf of the church, it's a legal process to declare that you have not been married before. So the priest will ask the couple just a series of questions to declare what their intention is as they approach the sacrament. So all of those things are part of what Catholics tend to call pre-cana or marriage prep. Again, about 6 months.
So that's a very interesting process that the church sets up for their couples, because it must be almost very therapeutic for couples to go through that together. It's something that honestly every couple should be doing, whether they're getting married in the church or not. I mean, it sounds like you're just really connecting to people to understand in the church the sacrament that they're taking, but in general the life step that they're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. Pope Francis loves the word accompaniment.
Ooh, I like
and
that.
So his vision is priests and deacons walking together with couples. The goal, of course, being a happy, healthy, holy marriage, right? That's the approach. And so one of the beautiful things about marriage is that it can be an opportunity for a couple to decide this is the community that we want to belong to. But that can be very difficult for a couple if the Catholic partner does not feel like there's a church that I belong to. So one of the consequences that I've seen in ministry over the years is that there's been a lot of change, and so sometimes couples feel like, well, there's not a priest we know. Who do we ask to do our wedding? There's not a, if you're practicing, you don't necessarily even go to the same parish church the way that people once did. And so when there's been that kind of instability, which is not just about the Catholic Church, it's about a more globalized society, about people moving away from home, with everything being more transient, which I feel like the pandemic has accelerated. There can be really this point of looking. And so what I would encourage couples to do is to really think about the place of their wedding, not just in the frame of what's the most beautiful church I can hold my wedding in, but what's the community where we want to belong to? Where is it that we want to build our life in? And that could be a neighborhood community, a parish community. So that's where I would start with that question.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, because that was actually my other question for you coming up was, what if somebody does not identify with a certain church, or maybe they're having a destination wedding, or they do not know personally a priest? Like, you just answered it for me, is that it sounds like just starting to think about where you want that community to be, or where do you want to identify, maybe it is the location where you're getting married, or maybe it is going to be the community that you're moving to or that you are starting your life with. So like you said, it goes back down to just kind of reaching out to the parish and then being patient and then starting from there, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned destination weddings, which are not an obstacle necessarily from the church's perspective, especially if a couple has another kind of connection. Like, for example, you want to get married in your college town. A lot of Catholic universities have chapels available to couples for weddings. Not every Catholic university is Notre Dame, where you have to wait for years to get married in the Basilica of the Sacred Heart. Okay, there are plenty of college chapels, like Providence College, for example, that is available to alumni for weddings. So that might be a beautiful option for a couple. Another thing to consider for a couple is that if you wanted to have a destination wedding, it is possible and totally legitimate and salutary even practice for a couple to approach a priest and say, you know what, for us, getting married in the church is important, but we're not sure that all of our family and friends can appreciate that. So what we would like is just a simple ceremony with you, Father, with you, Deacon, before we go away for our wedding. I've only done that a few times, but I wish more couples would take advantage of that option, because a Catholic wedding does not mean the blowout fest with 2,000 of your closest Italian relatives. It doesn't mean that necessarily.
It's so funny that you brought that up, because that's exactly what my husband and I did. So we got married, with the pageantry, for less of words, right? For this, on a certain day, and we got married out on a field, and it was beautiful. It was a tented wedding. But we also then, on a private, I think there was literally only 10 family members there, got our marriage blessed in the Catholic Church. And renewal of vows, because we did it after. But it was very important for us that we wanted to have that sacrament of marriage. But like I said, the actual day, we didn't do it in the Catholic Church. But I was going to say to you, the other thing I was going to ask you was, I've seen a lot of times where there's guest priests that come to different churches. Like I could tell that. So, for example, some of my couples, I can tell that this is their priest, but it's not their church. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. So there is some flexibility there. I joked earlier about a couple wanting the most beautiful Catholic church they could find. And I deeply sympathize with that. Look, I wish every church were as beautiful as the Sistine Chapel. So there might be a space that you think, yes, this is it. This church has the aisle. This church has the lighting. So it depends on basically it depends on the schedule and the availability and the resources of a particular church to host a wedding. So some places will be more accommodating with that than others. And frankly, a lot of it has to do with the calendar. The beautiful churches, as you would expect, are in high demand, and they may or may not have the staff and space to accommodate requests that come to them. So you might find that a pastor has decided the best way to handle that question in his own church is to say, well, we only host weddings for parishioners. This has to be your community. You have to belong here. Or some pastors will be more entrepreneurial, let's say, and they'll say, well, we'll take anybody, but there's going to be a cost because my community needs your help making that contribution to our ministry. So that can vary from place to place. And again, the question of a guest celebrant is not a big one for the church. Priests move around to handle all kinds of things all the time, but there might be some administrative aspects to that'll be handled on the back end.
So let's say a couple decides on a parish where they would like to have their sacrament of marriage. What are some other factors that this couple needs to now start to think about in regards to their ceremony?
Yeah, so typically a parish priest is going to privilege the schedule of his parish. So that means that it's not an open book for a couple approaching the church looking for a time for their wedding. So there might be a vigil mass or a scheduled hour of confessions or other regular ceremonies and events for the local community that are kind of fixed. So couples should anticipate a priest saying, well, this or that time may or may not be available. Some priests are very flexible and they're very open to things like Friday night weddings or Sunday afternoon weddings. Other priests are not, and they say that weddings can only happen on Saturday afternoons at a set time. So one thing that can be frustrating for a couple is if they set a time with a venue and then don't have the availability at the church that they were expecting, that could be cause for a great crisis in planning. So what I would suggest is to try and get the date settled with the church, because the church will have more limitations probably than the venue. If the venue is at your service, you've paid for it in a way that the church is not. There are more likely to be more restrictions in the church.
And also, too, just kind of throwing something in the mix over there. As far as I go, I see this a lot where a lot of times my couples call me and they say, hey, I'm getting married at 2 o'clock. This is the time that the church had. But yet my cocktail hour at my venue is not till 5. We have this large gap. There are so many ways to fill that gap. And, you want to think about your own self and your day, but also, too, you want to think about your guests. And there's so many little unique opportunities that I've seen people do to entertain their guests, especially if it's a destination wedding or people are coming in town. There's a lot of little local restaurants that people can go grab a cocktail at, or sometimes people go home, they change anyway into their night attire. So, and then, the couple can also take advantage of doing their pictures at that time, go to different locations. So there's a lot of things that a couple can do planning that has that gap. And it honestly, on a photographer's end, who's been doing this for so many years, it is very common that just as common as you go right from your parish to your reception hall, you do also have to a large gap of a few hours, because it obviously, like you said, it goes on when the church is available and also to when the venue is available, or when you would like for people to start having dinner for services for your celebration. But with that said, what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, I would love to start actually talking about the Catholic ceremony, some details, how you can make it unique, and we can kind of go from there. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you like what you're hearing, I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. And don't forget, you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you left a fabulous review on Apple Podcast. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support. And now, let's get back to the episode. All right, well, welcome back, podcast friends. So right before the break, we were talking with Father Patrick a little bit about if having a Catholic ceremony was right for you. So now let's actually get into the Catholic ceremony. So Father Patrick, for our listeners, let's say they now have decided that it's right for them and this is something that they want to do. Talk to me a little bit about the actual Catholic ceremony.
Good. So the first big question that's going to come up, Sarah, is people will ask, do I have to have a mass? And I always kind of laugh at the phrasing, do I have to have, but it's a totally legitimate one, right? Because people are saying like, well, again, maybe some of my friends or family or guests are not Catholic. And so they might not be as comfortable with a full mass. The answer is no, you don't have to have a mass. So in the church's eyes, there are two main ways that, two main rites for the sacrament of marriage. And one is just the rite, the exchange of vows itself. You know, it includes readings and there's an opportunity to have music. So it can still be fairly decorous, fairly formal, depending on, again, the choices that the couple makes, or to exchange the vows and have the marriage ceremony in the context of a whole mass. So again, I think a lot of that conversation about whether or not to have a mass depends on whether or not both partners are Catholic and whether or not the future spouses feel that their family and guests will be comfortable in a Catholic mass. And those are legitimate questions, you know, that people are deciding for their wedding day.
Exactly. And it's funny because on the other side, right? So as a photographer, when I'm talking with our couples, I literally on the question form is one of them like, are you having a full mass, quote unquote, or are you not? And what I mean by that is obviously the sacrament of communion, right? And
exactly.
It's just funny because you're getting it on your end and then here I am asking them. It's just because it kind of goes into my timeline and planning how long the ceremony will be. What are some other things, though, that couples can do to make their ceremony unique? You said in the very beginning that a lot of times people feel like it's very cookie cutter and they can't personalize their Catholic ceremony. What can they do if they want to add a little more, uniqueness to their ceremony?
So one of the beautiful things about preparing for a wedding is taking seriously the selection of readings. So the church has a list. There are some prescriptions about the selections of scripture which are to be read during a wedding ceremony. So you choose from a kind of menu of options, right? But taking seriously those choices, reading the readings together as a couple, discussing what resonates in the scripture with you, that can make a huge impact on the wedding day, especially if you share those reasons why you chose the readings you chose with the priest. So some priests will be very good about this as they construct their homily. They'll ask, why did you choose this or that reading? And then the priest can give the couple's reasons, what resonated with the couple in the homily, referring to the scriptures as he narrates the couple's story. So I think that's a very important thing. Most priests will do that. Some may or may not. But that is a beautiful exercise, regardless of whether the priest includes those comments that you make in his homily. It's a beautiful exercise for the couple to help them feel like, not just feel, but to help them claim and own the choices that they've made for the ceremony.
I love that because I have to tell you, a lot of times when I'm there's obviously moments where we don't need the pictures taken. So we kind of just sit back and we listen. And a lot of it is when the priest is speaking in the very beginning. And it's interesting for me because you start to get a little bit, like you said, a lot of priests do a really good job at this. You start to understand a little bit about the couple, why they chose a lot of the readings, or just how they met. Sometimes the priest will talk about, or just stuff about marriage in general, right? But for me, all eyes are on the couple. But as a photographer, sometimes I'm looking around the parish. I'm just kind of watching the couples that are there, whether, some people are single, hey, but, I'm looking at the couples and I'm just kind of watching a little bit more hand-holding happening, a little bit more nodding, you start to see people kind of lean into each other a little bit. I don't know, just love's in the air, I guess. And so a lot of times I feel the priests do a really good job of just kind of talking about marriage and the journey. It's just interesting that I enjoy that part of the Catholic ceremony when I am there working. I find it very personal, and every single priest says something very different. And I think it's, for the listeners, that is really a very custom piece of your ceremony.
Another thing that's kind of signature for Catholic weddings, and this is cultural, the church does not require this, are these big bridal parties, right? So a lot of times when people envision a Catholic wedding, they think, okay, we've got to have dozens of people standing up around the altar, all in beautiful matching suits and dresses. That is not required by the church. The church requires that you name 2 witnesses. So 2 people who will sign that so-and-so were validly married in the church, because marriage is a public act in the eyes of the church. So you have to have witnesses. That's it. That's the bare minimum. You need a bride, a groom, and 2 witnesses and a priest. And you're all set for the wedding. So that can mean then that you have a lot of flexibility to determine your bridal party and where they stand and how present or visible they are in the ceremony. So some brides, for example, will prefer to be with just their groom not flanked by the bridal party at either the beginning of the ceremony or at the exchange of vows. So those are options that are totally fluid. You don't have to have the bridal party to process in. You can have the bridal party process in. There are options as to whether the groomsmen come in for the sacristy or the back of the church. All of those things are very fluid. Your priest might have particular preferences. Different parishes might have different customs about these things, but it's worth asking particularly questions about what the expectations from the church are about where, and by church, I mean the particular parish, the location of your wedding, because there's a lot of flexibility with the bridal party.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That's another way to personalize it. You are right. I've seen so many different bridal parties, the way they come in, they come out, where they stand, whether they don't. It's a very fluid situation. So I think in general, it's really important for the listeners to understand that that's another way you can customize your ceremony. What about people wanting to involve family members? What is some ways that they can customize their ceremony and involving those that they love?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important for brides and grooms. And it's important for the church because it's an opportunity to ask, for example, a godparent. That's a beautiful Catholic custom of asking a godparent to proclaim one of the readings or to proclaim the prayers of the faithful. That's another thing that can be customized by a couple. You can write the petitions, the kind of prayers that are read after the vows are exchanged, and which can be a beautiful thing if a couple wants to write those. There are several different formula that can be chosen from too, of course. Couples can ask parents to bring up the gifts if you're having a full mass, which is another lovely moment often, or perhaps, again, godparents. So those are a couple opportunities to involve other family members that maybe a couple doesn't think of or see right at the beginning of the planning of their ceremony.
What about vows?
Well, we've got them. I think a lot of people know that the Catholic Church does not permit couples to write their own vows, so that's not shattering anyone's world. I think that's pretty widely understood. The Catholic liturgy is very heavily ritualized, and that's part of our tradition and our custom. There are, however, choices with the way and the text that the couples can say when they proclaim their vows. So couples can repeat the vows and proclaim them to each other. So I have seen couples, and this is very beautiful, memorize the vows formula and say them, from their heart, right? So they take the text of the church, and without any kind of words in front of them or without the priest, they profess the vow, which is incredible. That's really beautiful. Maybe you have seen at a ceremony where a priest kind of says line by line, and the couple repeats the full vow afterwards. The other option, of course, is for the priest to proclaim the vow and then to ask it in a question, and the bride or groom then answer simply, "I do," right? Which is like part of the Catholic wedding imagination. You get to the altar and you say, "I do." So that's a huge part of our understanding of weddings. And then along with those options, the text of the vows, there are two options. There's one that I would say is just totally based, right? Until death do us part. And then there's one that's a little bit more open that I would say is a little bit warmer, right? Where a couple says all the days of my life. So there are options with the actual formula as well.
Father Patrick, what are some other options that couples can do in their Catholic ceremony to make it unique to them? You talked a little bit about having your family members bring up the communion, but what are some other options that you've seen or that you offer to your couples?
So I think another beautiful one, and I'm pretty sure this is an Italian tradition, but to make an offering of flowers to the Virgin Mary, to ask Our Lady's intercession. So this is when you get to a wedding, right? And you hear a beautiful Ave Maria sung, and the couple goes over and they offer flowers to the Virgin Mary. I always, despite not being Italian, I always encourage couples to do this, because so many couples have told me that is the only moment of prayer they get in their entire day. Because when does that happen in the ceremony? Well, after you're married. And so it's just the bride and groom standing there together, usually before a beautiful statue or other image of the Virgin Mary, and they have one moment just to pray together. And it becomes something that they can really go back to and cling to from their wedding day. But of course, one thing we didn't mention is music. That music entirely reflects a couple's personality. Now, again, like with scripture, typically there's a kind of menu of options. And those are important to consider. From the church's perspective, we want sacred music, so nothing, no Led Zeppelin, nothing secular. But also some of those selections are going to be dependent on the musicians who are there. So I think part of what's at stake here is the reality of what is able to be performed in a church beautifully. So not every choir, not every organist, not every cantor has the same expertise, has the same skill level. And so some of what is being proposed by the church, I think it's good for couples to remember, is simply what is able to be sung well.
Fair enough. I mean, that's the reality, right?
Because we've been there when it's ugly, and I would spare every couple that, if possible.
Or if you want something unique, go that route. What about, so hey, we talked about all of the different options that someone can do and everything's going right and all this lovely planning and how you can plan. But here's the reality. Sometimes you can plan and you can pick unique items for your ceremony and readings and music. But here's the deal. What happens if just time gets ahead of you and the couple or someone's running late or the ceremony just starts late? What do we do with this?
Good. So there are a lot of things a priest can do to oversee the tempo of the liturgy. So in such a case, there are prayers, particularly in the Mass, that can be expedited. There are options within the Mass for longer or shorter Eucharistic prayers, for example. And if a priest knows, okay, I got to move, he can arrange things in the liturgy to keep things going. So again, I think the key is to let the celebrant know what's going on with the timing as soon as possible. To have a wedding coordinator or a bridesmaid get in touch with the celebrant and say, look, we're going to be pressed for time here. Are there things you can do in the ceremony? I mean, one of the biggest things that people aren't really aware of it, but the thing that takes a lot of time in a Catholic wedding are the processions. When you start at the beginning and you hear some beautiful music, you're in for a good 10-15 minute sit before the bride shows up. So there are ways of kind of trimming some of the pageantry if push comes to shove really, really with the schedule. My word, though, as a priest is, it's a wedding day. Just roll with it. The venue's going to roll with it. People will be accommodating. It's a little bit messy, and there's already enough stress on you because your crazy step grandma is running around or whatever it is. So couples really, I think, should see that as an invitation to just kind of be open to whatever comes in the day.
Because that's marriage. There's always going to be, not everything's going to be planned, right? Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing now after the ceremony. So before they all live happily ever after, actually after the ceremony, are you finding that couples are going into receiving lines, or what are you finding that people do as they progress out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish that more couples did do receiving lines, as a point of fact, because I think it's a beautiful way for them to greet their guests before heading to the reception, particularly, as you mentioned, if there's some time between the ceremony at the church and the reception itself. So I think it's a very lovely way to greet guests, and I find it just a bit more formal, a bit more handsome than visiting the tables at a reception. That's totally a personal preference. Now, some places that might not be an option to do a receiving line after a ceremony because there's another event happening in the church. So I say that, cautioning brides before they get their hearts set on that. But so that was once, I think, a more prominent custom than it is now. Typically, couples will take pictures in the church, with their celebrant. This is an extraordinary thing, very beautiful thing, very lovely thing. That's part of the expectation, I think, of the priest celebrant for a wedding, for a few photos afterward.
I just have to say one thing about the receiving line. I need it to come back. So a lot of times people have this love-hate with receiving line, but just kind of throwing this out there for me, and you also kind of touched upon the reason why, is a lot of times I'm finding that couples were cutting it out, right? They were going immediately to their reception, or they were going immediately to do photos, or they needed people to leave the church so they could come back around and, like you said, take pictures. Obviously, something very special to them where they got married right there in front of the parish. But I would love for people to bring it back. I'm starting to see the trend leave. And the reason being is it's exactly that. You don't have to, but you should, right? It's just a nice thing to do. Greet and welcome and thank your guest for coming to your actual wedding. I mean, that was the ceremony. That's why they're all there. Yeah, they're there for the party too, but they're there to see you all get married. And there is definitely something to be said about having to do it at your reception. You don't get to sit as a couple. You don't get to sit and eat your meal. You are up and about, and you're talking to everybody else except for just really taking that moment in and being as a couple, whether it be at your sweetheart table or your main table. So if you do a receiving line, I do feel you kind of get that out of the way. And also, too, your guests feel like they get to give you hugs and welcome you. And you welcoming them. I mean, obviously, you have to check with your parish, obviously, like you said, because time may not allow it. But if it does, it's definitely something that can be done correctly and quickly. I mean, you don't have to even do everybody. You don't have to have your entire wedding party or your family. It could just be the two of you. So it's just something to think about. I would love to see it done more. With that said, though, once a couple finishes their ceremony and their day, what happens after? What do they need to do in the eyes of the church after their entire ceremony is over?
Be Catholic. No, the extraordinary and joyful thing, I think, is the most important thing is to share with other couples your experience, particularly if there's a priest or a parish or a musician or someone that helped you to pray well and to have a lovely experience on your wedding day. To be bold about talking about that, because I think now we're to the point where more people are inclined not to get married in the church. So if you've had a beautiful experience and you are ready to talk about that, that goes a long way to encouraging other Catholic couples to pursue a wedding in the church. Because as we've been talking about today, there are a lot of obstacles. There are a lot of things that are complicated to navigate a Catholic wedding. And you and your spouse saying, this made a difference in our life, can really be encouraging to another couple so that they can find the same graces, the same joys and happiness that you found on your wedding day.
Well, Father Patrick, we could literally sit here and dissect the Catholic ceremony for days, but it is time for our wrap-up question. With that said, what are some key points that couples should be thinking about when considering having a Catholic ceremony?
Yeah, I think the first is to communicate early and often with priests and parish staff. Again, it can be frustrating for a couple to try and navigate the question of whether or not a Catholic ceremony is right for them, and then to confirm the reservations of the church and their celebrant. So recognize that might take some time, but to really take the initiative, understanding that a parish is going to have limited resources to help support a couple through that. So that would be my first point. I would say the second would be to know that there are many options to customize a Catholic ceremony. So to take those seriously as you prepare for the day, to plan your readings and scriptures. And finally, I would say that there are beautiful ways and many differences of how to involve family members and friends in a Catholic ceremony. So think about how you want to present and involve your loved ones in your big day.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Wedding Secrets Unveiled. You helped our listeners become one step closer to their journey of a stress-free wedding planning. Can you tell everyone where they could find you?
Sure. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Patrick Mary OP. I also mentioned that I'm the editor of our Sunday Visitor, which is a Catholic newspaper and publishing company. We have a beautiful website called CatholicWeddingHelp.com. I say beautiful, it's a little clunky, but it has all the answers you're looking for. It's very navigable. And there's a marvelous companion that our publishing company has produced, and that is aesthetically gorgeous. It's called the Catholic Wedding Planner, and it's a fabulous guide for every Catholic couple as they prepare for their wedding day. And for something a little bit more casual, if you like the kind of tone of this episode, Check out our Dominican Friars podcast, which is called Godsplaining. You can follow that podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Godsplaining.
And for our listeners, what I will do is I'll have Father Patrick's information on our episode show notes, which you can find on our blog and also on our website page, which is at sarahzarella.com/podcast. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Wedding Secrets Unveiled. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I want to tell you something. I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. We love photographing while having fun, of course. Check out our podcast page on our website for our show notes along with upcoming episodes with your local wedding experts. Listen in as we help you plan your epic event. And don't forget that you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. I would so appreciate if you left a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support and let us know what you think. If you know any wedding experts that would like to be a guest, we have a link directly on our website where they can let us know. Thank you for listening.